I mean, I'm feeling a great sense of urgency about the situation we're facing as a global species right now. I feel intimidated, insecure, and confused, as I'm sure most people do. And anybody who doesn't, I don't believe them anyway. So when I was sitting here, I realized that I'm not sure I'm ready to die yet. But I mean it seriously, spiritually, I'm not ready to let go of this incarnation. So, work to do. So please take the time you've taken to come spend time with me here seriously, which means don't waste a minute. But I'm very pleased that I could feel the minute I walked in the room, I could feel in a lot of you there was a great intention in your presence here, in your presence here, in your attitude to being here. I could feel in the first second I walked in the room. And inherent in that, I could feel the momentum of the last 30 years of my work alive in a lot of you, being expressed in your intention to be serious, which is very hard to find these days, people being serious about enlightenment. The first thing I wanted to say was that in the enlightenment context, which is what this is, the quest for unconditional, absolute inner freedom is a primary value, right? But in evolutionary enlightenment, and from an integral perspective as I understand it, freedom is not an end in itself, but it's a means to being able to become a sane, clear, thinking, morally informed human being. So at a certain point, some of us realize that unless we can have access to a profound degree of inner freedom, we will have no way to figure out how to make the right choices in relationship to the actions we take and the choices we make in life. So the goal of inner freedom is the means to giving us access to deep and profound sanity and the ability to act in a sane and purposeful way in a crazy and insane world. That's the idea. So these days, a lot of people feel that enlightenment or the seeking for personal transcendence is a form of escapism or spiritual bypassing, which I firmly disagree with. It's a means to a particular kind of relationship to life that's based on putting the primacy of consciousness first. And it gives us a particular vantage point, a particular way of seeing reality, and a particular way of relating to reality. So the point I'm fond of making and what I wanted to make this morning is that freedom is, the freedom I'm speaking about, the inner freedom I'm speaking about, that I've always spoken about, is a state of consciousness, is a conscious experience, is a direct experience that we can gain access to. The freedom is an inner experience, a spiritual experience, which is in and of itself liberating. But freedom isn't only a state of consciousness or a higher state of consciousness, it's also a deliberate, informed, inspired, disciplined choice in relationship to actions we take in life. And when we understand that freedom is a state of consciousness, is a direct, subjective inner experience, but it's also a choice. It covers all options and all possibilities. Now, without the experience of inner freedom, the profound experience of inner freedom, we won't be in a position to make the right choices. But the experience itself is not enough, because the right choices at times still need to be struggled with and for. So this is an ongoing, perpetual ordeal for people who are very serious about doing the right thing for the right reasons in a crazy world desperately in need of sanity. So from my perspective and the perspective of the teaching, that enlightenment, as the way, at least in the way I'm teaching it, is not becomes an obligation as a stepping stone for our potential to be our most sane selves. And in the teaching I speak a lot about the difference between relative reality and absolute reality, which we'll be speaking about a lot these days. So in the enlightenment context, the experience of inner freedom as a higher state of consciousness is usually understood to be a revelation of a non-relative or an absolute dimension of reality. So the absolute, transcendental nature of reality is absolute and unqualified, infinite, birthless and deathless and indestructible, and overwhelming in its immensity and intensity, and inherently liberating nature. So it is always free. And when you recognize that the Absolute is your own true nature at the deepest level of reality, you'll realize that freedom is who you always really are at the deepest level. And those are fancy words, and they're important to understand, but unless it becomes your actual experience from time to time, it's unlikely that it'll be all the time, but unless it becomes a tangible part of your experience from time to time, any talk of liberation won't have any meaning for you besides intellectual or philosophical or metaphorical. So the experience of unconditional, radical, absolute, liberated consciousness in all its ecstasy, joy, and unimaginable love and freedom is essential to have from time to time, so you get to remember who God is and who you are, free from any kind of doubt or insecurity or ambivalence. That becomes the source of what I call spiritual self-confidence. So that kind of experience is important to have at least once in your life, but if possible, relatively often. Because it's hard to remember how amazing the highest truth or God actually is. It's easy to forget. Hard to remember and easy to forget. But if the experience makes a deep enough penetration into your soul, you'll never forget it. But in order to be able to live and act with spiritual self-confidence, you need to have that kind of experience on a regular basis. We all do. That's why we live the spiritual life in earnest, or at least that's my understanding of why. But the experience, in the context of the teaching, is there to help us, to remind us what's most important, and to act like a North Star or a compass about what's most important. Because within the complexity of the human experience, it's very easy to forget what's most important, and most people do all the time, every single day, including people that are occasionally awake. So as I always say, waking up is easy, staying awake is very hard. So waking up is usually not the end of the search, it's usually the beginning of a process of awakening that may take many lifetimes. It probably does take many lifetimes. But in this context, we want to see the awakening as a means to an end, not an end in itself. In the way that my teacher taught, the waking up was an end in itself. You wake up and that's the end, and the rest is irrelevant. But in an evolutionary creative approach to enlightenment, it's what happens after that that means everything or nothing. So in evolutionary enlightenment, the first tenet of the teaching says, I want to be free more than anything else, so I can be a sane, liberated, creative, relatively significant participant in the human experience. So I can contribute to meaning, purpose, and value in this crazy, chaotic unfolding that we're all part of. That's why it's important. So in this teaching, we don't see enlightenment as an end in itself, but as a means to an end, as a means to be sane, to liberate our creative potential and our capacity for love and care. So that's why you want to do this. So it's not for you or me, it's for the universe, but for the creative process. How does that sound? So the point I wanted to make this morning is that is the apparent polarity or the apparent contradiction between the fact of freedom being our own natural state and our own true nature, and synonymous with the highest level of reality and that which is non-relative and absolute, and the fact that freedom is also a conscious choice that needs to be made by most people again and again and again. In other words, to be brutally honest, as most of you already know, unconditional, radical inner freedom can never be taken for granted, no matter how you think you feel on a good day. Because in terms of relative reality, freedom can only be discerned or understood through the choices we make and their consequences in the complex continuity of our karma, the unfolding of our karma over lifetimes, as I understand it. And how to understand all that is a very complex business, depending on so many different multiple perspectives, it's unimaginable. To be conscious and to be sane and to be deeply wise and intelligent and self-aware in a context of infinite complexity is almost impossible. But at least we can try. So trying our best is a big part of what it's all about. And in an evolutionary context, there's no end, there's no final arrival, there's no point of final arrival, there's no, now I know, now I understand. Because there's always more to understand and more complexity to come to terms with. So nobody can ever, in that context, nobody can ever get anything absolutely right. Or even if you do, it'll only last for a second, then it's gone. So because of that, there's a degree of eternal vigilance and humility and an intensity of seriousness that we all have to bring to the endeavor of waking up, and not only waking up, but staying awake and working to act that awakeness, in spite of how hard it is and how confusing it is, and how difficult it is to be free in a crazy world. The world is a crazy place. A lot of people who don't really believe that now can see very clearly that we are crazy. And then, of course, everybody finds ways to avoid the seriousness of the endeavor through getting lost in survival or other things, security, procreation, fame. Any number of relative issues can suddenly become more important than these non-relative or absolute concerns. And the ego is a monster, from my perspective. It's always going to take you in another direction and take you in another direction. And what about this, and what about that, and what about this, and what about that? So I've been thinking a lot about how I can justify my work, this teaching, in this world context of this crazy time in history. So what I've come to is very simple and kind of obvious, that in spite of all this madness, fear, insecurity, chaos, in spite of it all, if we can find a way to come together in truth, honesty, soul-level integrity, meaning, purpose, expanded consciousness that is emerging at a higher level than the one before, whatever that was. And we can live it and embody it and ultimately over time be able to demonstrate that it is a revolution of consciousness, which a lot of spiritual gurus speak about, is actually happening and is self-sustaining in and through a certain group of people. And they can demonstrate it and survive chaos, survive conflict, survive challenges without crumbling. They'll say a lot about the nature of spirit and its religious potential. The religious potential means to be able to cohere groups of people in a shared vision or a shared ideology. And in the Enlightenment context, it's a shared utopian ideology, which most people don't believe in anymore for a lot of good reasons, but I do. I haven't given up. Because to me, without a utopian ideology, life, this incarnation doesn't make any sense to me, personally. So if we can succeed dramatically, in spite of all the failures, in spite of all the cynicism, and doubt, and fear, and insecurity, and narcissism, and narcissism, and narcissism, then we can say, yeah, we did it. And then we can die with a peaceful heart. So unless I can accomplish that, I won't be able to die happily. And for me personally, that's my karmic predicament. So if you're serious, you want to get to the point where you feel when you wake up every morning that that's actually who you are, that your mission in life is to demonstrate a higher potential for all of humanity and to prove that beautiful, liberating, beautiful potential in human beings is possible, against all the odds, against all the naysayers, against our own personal failings also. We want to succeed anyway. Because there are forces in culture, there are forces in human consciousness and human culture, and there always have been, that don't want this liberating truth to emerge or to become known by too many people. They're anti-spiritual forces in the universe, asuric forces. I'm not just being superstitious. In order to succeed in doing this, you need to cultivate a ferocious degree of independence to be able to pull this off. For the idealism to be able to survive in your heart and in your mind and in your soul. So we want us to learn if you are a serious practitioner of enlightenment or evolutionary enlightenment or the highest human aspiration, the evolution of consciousness, you want to constantly be working with the polarity between freedom being a state and freedom being a choice. So in relationship to freedom being a state, are the choices you're making related to that state of consciousness that you experienced as being the highest and most liberated moments of your life? Is our life and the way we're trying to live it a reflection of our own deepest understanding of the highest truth we've experienced? And some days it's going to be more an expression of that, and other days it's going to be less. So if there was nobody making choice, and if there was nobody existed who was making choices, there was no choosing faculty. If there was no chooser, if there was no choosing faculty, but consciousness was just an experience that was happening to someone who was no one, then choice wouldn't matter because there was nobody choosing to do anything anyway. And so then in that kind of context, just letting go of the idea that there ever was a chooser is your path to liberation, is your source of your experience of liberation. But when you wake up to reality and realize that part of the evolutionary process is the emergence of the appearance of a choosing faculty and a chooser and a unique individual soul, we want to become very interested in that part of ourselves and that part of each other and what he or she's up to yesterday, today, and tomorrow, morning, noon, and evening. So it's the part of us that makes the choices, the chooser, the choosing faculty, that gets confused from time to time, once in a while, or every day, all the time, about what the right thing to do is. So in an enlightenment context, you'll always find that that your own reawakening to that which is non-relative and absolute will clarify for you all the confusion you're experiencing at the deepest level. So, oh, that's very simple. Hard to remember and so easy to forget. So the radical enlightenment that I teach, which is, I've always been known for being a radical character. And the radicality doesn't come as much from my pathological narcissism as it does from my understanding of a very deep and profound embrace of the implications of a non-relative or absolute dimension of reality. Because when your embrace of reality gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the force of the non-relative or absolute nature of truth or absolute reality itself begins to infuse itself and overwhelm your mind and personality, for better and for worse. But it also can be a source of enormous confidence, spiritual self-confidence, life confidence, person confidence, confidence in the power of creativity, and they need to be relatively free, more and more free to be able to be a truly creative participant in the human experience. So unless you're free, inwardly free, unless you have access to the power of the Absolute, our ability or capacity to be a creative co-conspirator with the Creator of the universe is going to be very narrow. But it's the access to the liberated state of consciousness that needs work from all of us. When it comes easily, and that's good. But when it doesn't come easily, we have to do whatever work we need to do to remain steady and centered. And nobody knows what tomorrow is going to bring, except more chaos in this world. And I've been paying attention over the last year quite a bit to what's happening in relationship to all the complexity we're all facing. And it dawned on me, the obvious dawned on me about 6 months ago, that nobody knows the answers. At this point in history, we're dealing with a level of complexity that's uncharted territory for human beings. And nobody knows the answers because nobody's ever lived through a challenge like this before. So in order to get through this and not be destroyed by it, and also ultimately ideally be able to be a positive expression of the possible amidst all this chaos, we're all going to have to do a lot of hard work on ourselves and together with each other in order to be able to be in the right spiritual and metaphysical position to be able to deal with it and respond in the highest manner we're capable of. So the non-duality in this context is the practice of seeing and reminding yourself that the complexity and the chaos that we're facing as a global species is your problem. Is our problem, is my problem. If we blame everybody else or the system and somehow see ourselves dualistically somehow estranged from this cosmic predicament as if we have nothing to do with it, first of all, it couldn't possibly be true, and second of all, it's not helpful. So if the question comes up, well, what does it mean to be responsible for all this? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a question that I think learning how to grapple with individually and collectively, earnestly, has to be an important part of this individual and shared spiritual practice at this point in history, no? Now, it's a very heavy truth to kind of be able to sustain bearing witness to from day to day, because it's just what we're facing is so absolutely overwhelming and inconceivable and crazy and insane and frightening and confusing. But we have to cultivate the spiritual strength to be able to do it, so we'll actually be living in the real world. Some things are hard to think about, but if that's what's happening, then we've got to think about it. Think about it, bear witness, and somehow be able to respond in some kind of way that means something good. And also, when you realize that nobody has the answer, people have different kinds of answers, and there are a lot of very good kinds of answers going on. But other people's answers might not be yours. So how authentic can any of us be in this endeavor to find out what the most appropriate response to all this will be in the context of our understanding what it means to be a conscious human being? So if we can find out what the answer to that question is for us, personally and collectively, that in and of itself will be very liberating for us at a soul level. The most important thing spiritually is to know you're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons, for your soul. That you're not wasting your time in responding or reacting or engaging in things that are just not really relevant. So if the experience of inner freedom is a higher state of consciousness, then you need to do what you need to do in order to experience that higher state of consciousness so you can know what freedom actually is for yourself. And you don't have to take anybody else's word for it. And when you find out for yourself, you realize that God exists, that there's an absolute principle that's real, that's self-liberating, that's eternal, birthless and deathless and indestructible. And you'll know it. And if the experience is deep enough, you won't have any doubt about it. 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 And in case you missed that one, you won't have any doubt about it, which is what'll set you free, because you won't have any doubt about it. As long as you have doubts, you have more work to do. It's only when you're free from doubt that you're free. When you're free from doubt, it doesn't matter what your experience is because you don't have any doubt. Then you're a lucky person. But a lucky person, if someone who's lucky because they don't have any doubt, is not really lucky. They're actually spiritually heroic. Because it takes a lot of courage and faith and faith and faith to have no doubt in the face of the temptation to doubt. Because once you begin to allow yourself to begin to doubt, you don't have to believe anymore. You don't have to have faith. You can become cynical and nihilistic and victimized. And the ego loves, that's a big relief for the ego, let me tell you. You mean I don't have to have faith in what I can't see anymore? What a relief. So the ego likes it, so that's the ego goes on a permanent vacation. Thank you. So that's the result of these higher state experiences. And then the question is, what the hell am I doing with the gift of life that I've been given? Is the life I'm choosing to live and the way I'm choosing to live it the most meaningful and purposeful choice that I have? Or not? And if it's not, why not? And examine the reasons. And have the courage to be ruthless with yourself. You don't have to talk to other people about this if you don't want to. But you need to have an honest conversation with yourself, at least, if you can. If you don't have the courage to have an honest conversation with yourself, you don't have any integrity. I can understand why we might not want to have honest conversations with other people, because most of the other people aren't trustworthy. I agree. If you show any real vulnerability to a lot of people, they'll just stab you in the back or in the face. But at least have the courage to have an honest conversation with yourself. Brutally honest, just between you and yourself. Or you and who's ever sitting on your shoulder. And wrestle it out with yourself. And you have to be careful who you trust if you want to speak about such vulnerable, important things in your life. Because not everybody has the same values. We don't all have the same values. We don't all share the same fundamental principles. We don't all make sense out of life in the same way. So if you're going to really dare to be that vulnerable with anybody else, you have to make sure that they share your values. It's easy to get off track. Hard to stay on track. So freedom is a higher state, spontaneous, natural, effortless, easy, obvious, self-evident. And it's also a choice, which is deliberate, intentional, sometimes very hard. Takes effort. Sometimes takes a kind of emotional and intellectual muscularity. And remember, all the forces of inertia, which gets all entangled with the ego, are against you or us. So sometimes making what you might consider to be the right choice in your highest moment takes an awful amount of soul-level effort. Sometimes it's easy. A lot of you already know this, I think, but the reason I make this point is because a lot of people think that enlightenment is supposed to always be easy. A lot of people just want to get off the hook. They don't have to struggle. They want life to be easy for me. Why should it be easy for you? A lot of people that want life to be so easy spiritually have had a pretty easy life anyway. They're usually very postmodern, very spoiled anyway. They've probably had it easier than most people have throughout human history. And yet they want it to be, why should it be easy? So the paradox, or the contrast between effortless, spontaneous, liberating, transcendental awareness, and the at times very difficult need to make the right choices, which takes an enormous amount of heroic, intellectual, and emotional and spiritual effort. You have to hold both of those truths in your awareness all the time. Which means when it's easy, and when it's obvious, then just let go and let it come through you. And when you know you need to make a heroic amount of effort to just get yourself back on track and to save yourself from the devil that exists inside all of us, then do whatever you need to do the right thing. But the thing we want to resist is minimizing the existential and metaphysical and moral challenge that's at stake here. The postmodern ego wants to minimize, why is that so important? It's very important. It's a matter of life and death. Really? Is anything a matter of life and death? Say, well, yes. For a lot of younger people these days, being earnest is a sign of stupidity. Being earnest is a sign of stupidity. What's the matter with you? You take life too seriously. Relax. You're going to die anyway. So in evolutionary enlightenment, we have the basic teaching of, say the whole teaching is the journey from -1 to 0 to +1, which is the journey from ignorance or wrong relationship to no relationship to right relationship. A lot of you have heard me speak about that for years. Wrong relationship or ignorance, no relationship, which is freedom, unconditional freedom, absolute freedom, to right relationship. But what I wanted to share with you this morning is that going from -1 to 0 to +1, as these are absolute positions, is also, in terms of the reality of the human experience, these three positions are constantly in flux in relationship to the reality of our conscious experience. Which what I mean to say is, you can say from an absolute position, there's ignorance, there's liberation, and then there's clarity. Blindness, awakening, and clear perception, you could say. As absolutes, which on an absolute level is true, but then you could also say, well, some days the experience of the presence of ignorance or unenlightenment, or the forces of ignorance and unenlightenment, are more prevalent than others, right? Some days it's just a thin veil, some days it's overwhelming. So there's a sliding scale. In the same way we could say the experience of transcending the mind, from confusion to clarity, from pain to, from what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body, from being overwhelmed by the presence of the pain body to it vanishing altogether, seemingly never to have ever existed, with the awakening. And as a result, the capacity for clear seeing, unobstructed by pain and ego, right? So what I want everybody to do, I want you to see these as three absolute positions on one hand, and also in terms of an absolute position. And at the same time see these three positions as part of this, on a sliding scale, as a relative sliding scale, in terms of the reality of the human experience. Which means, as I just was saying, some days your experience of the obscuring power of ignorance, unconscious conditioning, and just madness will be mild. Some days it'll be very intense and overwhelming, some days it'll be barely present. And you want to try to be aware of this, conscious of these changes in your own inner experience in the context of a sliding scale. You want to bear witness to these things and to be aware of what's going on inside yourself. In terms of in terms of where you are. And then in terms of the experience of emptiness, when your mind and ego stop obscuring your conscious experience or experience of consciousness. How profound is it? Because there's levels and levels and levels of profundity here. There's levels of depth and seamless clarity that are different. They're not all the same. So you want to be aware of the difference, the experience of these different levels of depth that you're capable of experiencing on different days for different reasons. Some days it'll be profound and absolutely liberating. Some days it'll be relatively liberating. Some days it'll be a little bit liberating, depending upon the depth of the state of consciousness, the depth of the experience you're having. And then in terms of the emergence of your capacity for clarity, what the result of that is the capacity for clarity, authenticity, creativity, uniqueness. Is a result of how much you've let go, or not. the liberating presence of the creative impulse awakening to itself within you. So some days this can be overwhelmingly, ecstatically profound and significant. Other days, mild, but present. And other days not present at all. But you want to be aware of these distinctions. That's why for some of you who follow my meditation teachings online, one of the things I'm always repeating is always know where you are. So you want to know what's happening. You want to have the capacity for awareness to know what's happening within your own experience of mind and consciousness, mind, body, and consciousness. And you want to see what's happening within you within the context of this entirety of your incarnation to the highest degree that you're able to understand it and make sense of it, which will be imperfect. But you always want to try and have a sense of where you are at in relationship to everything that's come before. Not easy, might even be impossible, but you want to try. See what's happening in context. Always see everything that's happening in context. Always see everything that's happening in context. And when you realize that contexts are multiple contexts that exist at the same time, it's a lot to keep track of. This is the need for being willing to make effort when necessary. Because karma and context is difficult to stay on top of. Because the ego is very immersed in the present moment, for better or for worse, in pain and pleasure. And usually it's not contextually aware. I think our soul has to be awakened in a profound way for there to be a continuity of contextual awareness. It's one of the things I remember in my former community. I would have a lot of trouble because I saw so many people would be so lost in the immediacy of their present moment experience, maybe of higher states of consciousness, that they wouldn't see those higher moments of higher states of consciousness in the context of the continuity of their own human beingness. So the only way we can make sense out of our experience at the highest level is to see everything in context. Context is what makes it possible for us to make sense out of our experience in the highest level, the biggest way, the most meaningful way. But the context is hard to keep a track of. What was the most important thing in your life 20 years ago? What was the most important thing in your life 10 years ago? What was the most important thing in your life 1 year ago? Changes. So when the context changes, the way you make meaning, the way we make meaning changes also. So it's very complicated and spiritually demanding to keep track of yourself. So unconditional freedom is a higher state of consciousness that needs to be attained and realized. It's got to happen. If you're interested in enlightenment, you don't attain that state of consciousness. It's not. You haven't arrived. And you don't have to arrive permanently, but you have to arrive for at least a few seconds. That's the good news. A few seconds can change your life forever, if it's the real thing. So this is what we have to work on, is this state. Gain access to that state. And for those people who are still interested in enlightenment, the state is everything. No state, no enlightenment, no higher metaphysical context that's not intellectual, that's not merely intellectual. So for enlightenment to mean anything, having access to the higher state is everything. Because it's the truth that we find access to in higher state that makes everything right. And for someone who's truly interested in enlightenment without having access to that state of consciousness, you feel like you're dead. So some people say, well, if that's where you're at, then you have problems. Maybe, maybe not. It just depends on what's most important to us. So realize that the state is essential if you're interested in enlightenment. Without the state, you don't have any progress. So that's one side of it, and the other is that the choices that we have the opportunity to make every day, we get a new chance. Every day is a new opportunity to see how free you can choose. You can freely choose. Isn't that nice? See how God is so gracious with all of us? She gives us all the opportunity to make the choice to be free every day. No matter if we've been bad boys and bad girls before, the day before. She's very patient, very forgiving. She gives us all another chance. I'll give you another. As long as we're breathing, we get another chance every day. So that my simple point I'm trying to make is that the metaphysical tension, the spiritually activated tension to do the right thing for the right reasons at the right time, inspired by the conscious experience of the higher state, the awakened state of consciousness, is there for all of us in front of us every single day. So the state is the guru. The guru is the guru because he or she has more access to the state than other people. So then access to the guru gives people access to the state. It's just how it works. No shoulds or shouldn'ts. But this is not a psychological context, it's a metaphysical context. And when you understand the science of how all this works, it makes it much easier to sort out all the complexity, because I feel there's just more complexity all the time. I'm just overwhelmed by it every day. I'm tired of it, as we all are. There's no escape anywhere available. There's no going back to Kansas. That's from The Wizard of Oz, you know that? That's the time in history all we live. There's no going back to the way things, however things were before, and things were many different ways. However things were, there's no going back. So Kansas in The Wizard of Oz represents going back to before she went to Oz, the land of Oz. She wanted to go back to the way things were before. So many of us, for good reasons and bad reasons, want to go back. Because there's the illusion that things will be, well, no, it would be a relief. But the reality is there's no going back, for better and for worse, and it's usually for worse than for better right now. So we have to be able to bear that truth, and then do our best to try to be heroic anyway, even if you don't feel like it. I don't think anybody feels like being heroic, do they? Even heroes? Well, maybe if they're narcissistic enough, they might feel like it. But most of us don't feel like it. Why should you want to be a hero? So what I'm trying to do in terms of talking about the paradox between effortlessness and effort is just to create a picture of the kind of the dynamic meta position we all need to be taking in relation to our experience that can take us to the height of our potential from day to day.